There is a digital collage image of a Black man on the left, pictured from the chest up, with different shades of brown making up his skin, wearing a patchwork shirt of varying blue patterns, and a bird's eye image of a street with two cars on it, one white and one yellow, cutting diagonally across his chest. This slide and all slides following also contain sponsor logos in the bottom right. Sponsored by New York Life Foundation, Deutsche Bank Americas Foundation, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the New York Public Library. Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org. Blue text on a white background. Back to school with Black comics and graphic novels. With Jerry Kraft, Greg Anderson Elysee, Liz Montague. Deirdre Hollman, EDM, Moderator. September 24th, 2020, 4:30 p.m. EDT. Thank you for joining us. We are currently playing our pre-event slideshow. Blue text on a white background. Welcome, the program will begin shortly. This slide and slides following feature the Schomburg Center Literary Festival branding in the upper right corner, with white text in a dark blue bubble with 3 peach-colored droplets overlaid. There is a digital collage image of a Black man on the left, pictured from the chest up, with different shades of brown making up his skin, wearing a patchwork shirt of varying blue patterns, and a bird's eye image of a street with 2 cars on it, one white and one yellow, cutting diagonally across his chest. This slide and all slides following also contain sponsor logos in the bottom right. Sponsored by New York Life Foundation, Deutsche Bank Americas Foundation, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the New York Public Library. Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org. Blue text on a white background. Back to school with Black comics and graphic novels. With Jerry Kraft, Greg Anderson Elysee, Liz Montague. Deirdre Hollman, EDM, Moderator. September 24th, 2020, 4:30 p.m. EDT.
And welcome back. Hello. Welcome to the Schomburg Center's 2nd Annual Literary Festival. My name is Katie Tubman, and I'm the Manager of Education Programs at the Schomburg Center. And this is YA is Lit. Whether you are rejoining us or watching for the first time, thank you for tuning in. The Schomburg Center is celebrating 95 years as one of the world's leading cultural institutions devoted to the research, preservation, and exhibition of materials focused on global Black experiences. While our doors remain closed, we have migrated online where you can access parts of our archival collection and enjoy programs like our literary festival. This festival continues to expand the Schomburg's long tradition of celebrating and uplifting authors of African descent from across the globe. Please remember to follow the LitFest schedule at the Schomburg Center litfest.org for all the incredible programming taking place this week. We also want you to stay engaged. I know many of you young folks are following, older folks as well. Feel free to follow us on social media at Schomburg Center on all platforms. And use the chat below on your screen, see that chat, to submit questions and comments. Just try to keep them PG, please. There will be a Q&A after this program, after the conversation between our panelists, and we will do our best to try and get to many of your questions as possible. As a reminder, finally, this program, we are recording for the archive. We're the Schomburg Center, y'all. But you, the audience, will not be a part of that recording. Our next program is called Back to School with Black Comics and Graphic Novels with Jerry Kraft, Shauna Grant, Greg Anderson Elysee, and Liz Montague. This panel is moderated by Deirdre Hollman. Deirdre is an avid educator with over 20 years of experience engaging youth and teachers in the study of Black history, art, and culture. She is the founder of the Black Comics Collective, a New York City-based comic community of Black comics enthusiasts who create and consume captivating stories featuring characters of color. The Black Comics Collective celebrates cultural diversity in comics and seeks to amplify awareness of creators, writers, illustrators, and publishers who are producing independent comics that depict a dynamic range of global Blackness, aesthetics, and social issues in both earthly and otherworldly realms. Yes. She is also the co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival. I'm honored to welcome Deirdre. Welcome.
Thank you, Katie, too. And thank you to everyone behind the Schomburg Center Lit Festival. It's a great honor to be a part of the program and to be celebrating the Black Comics Collective's 3rd anniversary here today with my distinguished panelists. I would like to introduce you to all 4 of them now, beginning with Jerry Craft. Jerry is the New York Times bestselling and Newbery Medal Award-winning author of the graphic novel New Kid, the biggest graphic novel out in the universe in 2020. His 2nd graphic novel, Class Act, publishes on October 6th. And he is also the creator of Mama's Boys, the award-winning comic strip, which won the African American Literary Award 5 times. Jerry is a co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival, and he received his BFA from the School of Visual Arts. He is also a Harlem native, and he grew up nearby in Washington Heights. He's a graduate of the Fieldson School and also went to SVA. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you. Excited.
Glad you're with us. I would like to introduce Shauna Grant. Shauna is a cartoonist and illustrator with the magical power to create cuteness, and that is no joke. Born and raised in New York City during the boom of the 90s Japanese anime and manga, her artwork is heavily influenced by shoujo and magical girls with a mix of Western cartoon flair. Adding diversity into the comic world is her biggest goal, and she's on a mission to create comics starring Black girls being the adorable heroines of their own story. Shauna is listed as one of the top 20 up-and-coming Black artists by the Comics Alliance, and she is currently signed onto a 2 graphic novel deal with First Second. Welcome, Shauna.
Hey.
It doesn't get more pink or more purple than with Shauna. Love it, love it. Our next panelist is Greg Anderson Elysee. Welcome, Greg. Greg is a Brooklyn-born Haitian-American writer, filmmaker, model, and educator. He is the writer and creator of the award-winning comic book and graphic novel series, It's Nana, the Were Spider, a coming-of-age dark fantasy book about the son of Anansi the Spider, drawing inspiration from Black myths, folklore, and spirituality. He is also the creator of the sci-fi series Marasa and other works. Through various platforms, Anderson Elysee continually fights for more inclusion and better representation when it comes to people of color and sexuality. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. Glad to have you here. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Liz Montague. Liz is a Philadelphia-based cartoonist and illustrator whose work focuses on the intersection of self and social awareness. She began contributing to The New Yorker in 2019 as a cartoonist and has illustrated for the US Open, Food Network, and Google. You might remember her recent Google Doodle of Jackie Orms, the African-American cartoonist. Liz is the creator of the popular Liz at Large cartoon series, which previously ran in Washington City Paper, where Liz was voted the best DC visual artist of 2020. She is currently working on her first book, a young adult graphic novel for Penguin Random House, with publication planned for fall 2020. She fundamentally believes in representation, accessible information, and drawing your feelings. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here. And I'm really proud of this panel. I mean, I couldn't ask for a more diverse group of committed folks who are creating comic imagery on all platforms. And so it gives me great pleasure to convene you and to have this conversation because Black comics are lit. And they're literature too. So I'm really happy to talk about not just the visual narratives, but the story narratives as well. You are all doing great work in that realm. And so we'll begin by introducing our audience to each of your body of work. So Jerry, it would be wonderful if you could tell us a little bit about the grand story narrative of New Kid and Class Act, and tell us about your characters and why you chose to center this great series on young adults.
Okay, so first, thank you for having me. You know, one of the big things is that I have always wanted to do kids as regular kids, African-American kids as regular kids. When I was coming up, a lot of my friends weren't necessarily readers. I wasn't really a reader besides Marvel Comics. And a lot of the books I had to read for school didn't feature African-American characters at all. If they did, they were primarily about slavery, civil rights, you know, police brutality. And not that those aren't important stories, but I was always envious of some of my white friends who had the Wimpy Kids and the Harry Potters and Percy Jacksons, and even though that was, you know, one around when I was younger. So when I created New Kid, that's the character that you see behind me on my screen. And it's loosely based on my life of growing up in Washington Heights, section of New York City. And I wanted to be an artist. My parents did not want me to be an artist because they didn't think that you could make a living as an artist. And, you know, they sent me to a private school in Riverdale called Fieldston. And now it was hard enough getting around with my friends in my own block, but now going to this primarily white, what I thought everyone was wealthy school, I thought that that was very different of showing this character as a young Black kid being a fish out of like two waters. And just regular things. So there's nothing bad that happens. So spoiler, no one dies. It's not that kind of book, but it's kind of like dealing with the daily microaggressions and things like that. He's, you know, 12 years old, starting 7th grade in a new school. And the next book, Class Act, which comes out in 13 days, is the follow-up book. And that will be the 8th grade year. And again, you know, a lot of people did not want to take the chance, as you know, from all the years that you and I vended at the Schaumburg Comic-Con. All my books were self-published up until 2014. And the fact that New Kid, you know, I went from self-publishing all those years to New Kid being the first graphic novel to win the Newbery and one of 5 African-American authors ever to win that. Just goes to show that those stories can be told and they can be critically acclaimed and also, you know, be popular with fans, because I think that kids are just dying to see other stories. And that's kind of where I'm going. So I'll be starting book 3 soon. So thank you.
Fantastic. I'll note that that's Jerry's New Kid and the Target back to school commercial.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll say it was slightly the inspiration for this panel. And so Shauna, I would like to invite you to talk about the world that you've created around Princess Love Pond and your other works.
Yes, hi there. So I'm most known for Princess Love Pond, which is my magical girl webcomic. And a lot of people like it. So yeah, this is actually like made for me by a fan. But it stars my main character, Leah Sagamore. She's a senior in high school, and her story is basically, I have to become an adult soon. I'm not ready. I don't know what I want to do with my life. And she literally gets hit in the head with this magical bunny fairy. And they're like, hey, like, you can become a magical girl. So that's what she decides that she's meant to do. And she becomes Princess Love Pond, who is the envoy of love and protects people's hearts from being eaten by the Dark Queen, who goes after people that are feeling like insecure and depressed and anxious. And so what Princess Love Pond does that I feel is different from a lot of modern magical girl stuff is that she kind of literally, like, she fights with hearts and kisses, and her whole point is to help these people through those emotional distress by giving them, you know, someone to like hear them out and just some encouraging words to like pull through, you know, like, you're not alone and everything is going to be okay. So my book is a lot about just promoting being empathetic to each other. And it takes place kind of like, my inspiration for it is kind of like my high school years. One thing that I totally am very like passionate about and like I can talk forever about is just how drastically different like real life high school is versus like TV high school, especially if you grew up like in a Black community. You know, like I grew up in the Bronx. Like my mom was very, you know, gracious to put me through a private school for most of my time, but I wanted to be an artist. And after, you know, going up to 8th grade in private school, I was like, there's not enough art here. I'm gonna go to public school. And that was quite the experience, like just how lacking it is. And so I kind of wanted to write a story about like, you know, these high school students who, you know, they're not all on the cheerleader squad because they probably don't have a cheerleader squad, but they're living their lives. And Leah in particular is just trying to find her way through it. You know, she's balancing being a high school student, wondering what she's going to do soon, having her friendships like with her best friend, Rachel, and also with dating as well, because, you know, young people date, and I grew up on shoujo manga and I love romance and everything. So I really wanted to kind of write about like, how do you balance like your first relationship while also trying to save the world and stuff. And I just really wanted to make something that showed Black girls being cute and adorable and soft, because usually those are not at all words that you see in conjunction with Black girls or Black women. You know, you're always supposed to be like the strong, independent Black women. And while my female characters are strong, like Princess Lapon is very powerful in her own way, but she's also, you know, she has feelings, she's delicate, and that's fine too. There's lots of ways that you can be strong and powerful, and Black girls deserve to be shown in all those different ways. And if you haven't seen Princess Lapon before, you might have seen me in other books. My most recent, I was part of Noisemakers by Kazoo, published by Random House, where I did a lovely short story about Maya Angelou. I've also been included in The Secret Loves of Geeks, published by Dark Horse Comics, and in several anthologies for Dirty Diamonds. And I've also done a few covers for Adventure Time comic series that Boom Studios put out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shauna. We're going to circle back with questions, but first I'd like Greg to tell us about the universe around It's Nana the Were-Spider.
Hi, so I am the writer and creator of It's Nana the Were-Spider. I currently have 2 volumes as well as another one-shot book, and I'm currently doing a Kickstarter for my most recent one called Showtime. And essentially, the story behind Is Nana the Were-Spider is based off of the stories of Anansi the Spider from West Africa and Caribbean folklore. my character is his son. And it's like a father and son dark fantasy coming of age story of the two of them trying to stop these creatures from causing chaos while trying not to drive each other crazy at the same time. And what I've been trying to do with the series is use it as a way to introduce people to more Black mythological gods and heroes, just to showcase that we have our own, as it's not required for us, in education to be educated on them. We grow up being required to know about the Greek myths and sometimes the Norse mythology, or even fairy tales, European fairy tales, but it's not required for us to know who any of like the Black deities or mythological figures are. And so I wanted to try to change that narrative a little bit with my writing, which is what majority of what I've been doing with Is Nana. So every story, there's a different figure from various Black diaspora stories, traditions, just to showcase that we have our own, and just to sort of add them in a bit of a contemporary, modern light, just to keep our stories going, keep it being alive, especially as the god of stories is supposed to be a nod to the spider. So Is Nana represents the next generation trying to reclaim our roots, but also finding a way to keep the traditions going while allowing them to adapt into our time and world.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you, Greg. And Liz, tell us about Liz at Large and how her coming of age story is situated in a particular kind of time space continuum.
Yeah, Liz at Large is very much rooted in like our contemporary reality right now. It's very much cultural commentary meets emotional literacy. So I'm a cartoon contributor for The New Yorker, so I read a lot of news, which takes a lot out of me. I think it takes a lot out of most people. And I think I noticed this very huge gap between reading the news and like being okay. And I just wanted to fill that, I guess, like find a way to accept and process where we're at right now while acknowledging it's not where we want to be, and being okay enough to get to where we want to be. Yeah, and just like taking the time to think about what I'm feeling and how the news makes me feel and putting that down on paper and sharing it with people, hopefully inspiring them and encouraging people to share what they feel as well. Yeah, very much draw your feelings. It's a great thing.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I want to pick up on something that all of you have talked about, that in your coming of age stories, there is this thread of emotional literacy. There is, Jerry is dealing with kind of the microaggressions and kind of the underside of the emotional dynamics and relationships at middle school, that's carrying over into what Shauna is exploring in high school life. And then you and Greg also, as your characters are developing, you're getting into their interior, into their heart, and letting the readers explore emotions, points of view, how they're trying to kind of position themselves between the past, the present, and the future, and deal with the chaos sometimes of this world. Tell me about why telling your story in a very emotional way is important to you.
Who's going first?
Oh, you started, so go ahead.
Dang you. I think one reason why that's important is because a lot of us grow up, especially youth of color, grow up not quite seeing us represented as much as the, I guess you want to say, the default white folks that we see in the media and books, just like Jerry was bringing up, seeing, Harry Potter and those type of stories, but not quite seeing one where we had a Black lead. And when we do usually see that, they're sort of side characters, their storyline may not be as important, so we don't quite see the different dimensions that those characters may have. Or if we do see it, they're not as important as the lead character, as their best friend, who is like representation of the everyday hero who's always usually white. So I think us showcasing, at least for me, showcasing Is Nana as having very different dimensions, you see him having to deal with his responsibilities. We see him being frustrated, having issues with his father. We see him having fun, learning what fun is as a kid, and so on and so forth. I think it allows us to be three-dimensional. And hopefully that reflects for a lot of the youth who are reading and looking for something as well to escape. And I think, yeah, trying to showcase all that is extremely important.
Yeah, I totally, absolutely agree with that. And for me, why it's so important to emphasize emotions and in my work is just because, you know, growing up in the Black community, like dealing with like anxiety and depression is really hard because, you know, that's one of those things that's usually like swept under the rug. Or, you know, it's like, well, you have clothes on your back and a roof over your head. You have no reason to really be sad. And so it's really important in my comics to show characters, you know, having moments where they're sad. And, you know, that's okay because we're not happy all the time, you know, and that's totally fine. So, like, even as Leah, as Princess Lovepan, like helps other people, she also deals with her own struggles with it too, you know, anxiety over what she's going to do with her life, you know, her feelings, you know, in her relationship and like growing apart with her friends and just realizing like how hard it is to like balance like so many aspects of your life and everything. And I think, you know, especially when you're in high school and ready to think about college or head into college, you realize, wow, there's like a lot of stuff that you have to juggle, you know, when you become an adult. And, you know, it's okay. Like, so it's very important for me to show that.
Jerry?
Yeah, I feel like traditionally there hasn't been a lot of empathy for people who look like us. So, for example, when I was a kid, we had Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. And, you know, that every kid watched that, whether they were Black, white, Latinx, everyone watched Fat Albert and talked about it. But literally, that was like 50 years ago, you know, and it's 2020 and there hasn't really been anything that has gone to that level as far as Black characters. So when you see, you know, kids talking about Harry Potter and Wimpy Kid and Dogman, like that's a luxury for us, you know, that I think white kids grow up and they just take for granted. And my kids read those books, but very rarely do you see it the opposite, where you see white kids clamoring to read about African-American characters. And I think that a lot of the books are on historical figures, which is great. It's a great way to learn about them, but they're so much larger than life that you don't think in terms of an everyday kid like Jordan Banks being picked on, or having, you know, kids that have their hair touched, or, you know, looked at like they're going to steal, or, you know, the teachers speaking to the Black kids in a more stern way because they immediately assume that they need to be disciplined at a higher level. You know, things that can really change people's minds. And that was what I really wanted to do. And one of the things that I fought for when I signed with HarperCollins was to do 3 books with these characters, so that the characters of Jordan Banks and Drew Ellis could kind of ascend to that, you know, in that capacity and serve as these kind of role models and ambassadors, you know, in literature that we almost never have. So.
That's great. And so I wonder, you guys all work in different formats. There's a lot of kind of transmedia going on here, but you have your single cell comics, your sequential comics, comic books, graphic novels. What do you find is the benefit to each kind of space, and how is your storytelling different across those spaces? So Liz, for instance, you work in a webcomic format, but in your work, so you have a sense of series in the webcomic, but really even your work with the New Yorker, it's just your single cell cartoon. So what is kind of the pluses, minuses of storytelling in that way?
I'm very partial to the single panel cartoon. It's great because I think that it's a really accessible kind of format. Like it's really like someone can interact with it on a timeline, or like it's not intimidating to read. It's very like you can take the 5 seconds it takes to kind of read that. It doesn't feel like overcommitting your time. And I think that right now there's a lot to compete with as far as for people's time. And so it's nice that you can just kind of slide in there. Obviously you're limited as far as how deep the narrative can go in a single panel, but yeah, I like it a lot.
And Greg, you've worked with comic books that have a series, but one of the things I noticed with you is you kind of dip back into some of the narratives and create one-off stories for new worlds that you kind of wedge in between the series that we're accustomed to. How do you find working in serial comics versus a graphic novel platform?
Well, I did that for particular reasons. When I first jumped into comics, well, first as a reader, as a consumer, I had to understand that hoping to see a finished product, especially when it came to independent, self-published, you're almost taking a gamble as a consumer, because you'll get maybe the first story or the second story, and then you're waiting forever for the third part or the completion. And I totally understand why, as a consumer, I was waiting, because funding and needing support was very tough when you're working by yourself and needing funds to continue on for the next story. And so when I made Isnana, the first 2 volumes, I wanted to at least have the full story. It took longer than it could have been, but I just wanted it to be full story that everyone can just pick it up, get the whole thing without having to wait forever for the next part. And in doing that, given that now I've established a bit of a fan base and an audience with Isnana with the first 2 volumes, now I can actually focus on coming up with like smaller stories that are faster to release, and at the same time still working towards the goal of what I wanted to do with Isnana. And there's benefits for both. I love the bigger storytelling. That's my favorite. But it's also a nice challenge for me as a writer to try to condense everything. And given that the next volume is actually going to be a collection of all the short ones that's come out. So in the end, the audience or whoever picks up the third one, even without picking up 1 and 2, they get a whole bunch of different stories all packed in one book. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I'm someone who loves variety. I love diversity. I never like the same things over and over again. So I think it works for me as a creator, as a writer, with that same style of interest.
Thank you. Shauna, you've started with webcomic, isn't that right? And then you went to print comics, small story print comics, and now you're working on your first graphic novel. So how did those different formats allow you to kind of grow your audience of readers?
Having a webcomic was really, really awesome. Sometimes really overwhelming, but overall like really awesome. I didn't expect like Princess Webcom to kind of like just blow up the way that it did. I was like, well, I've been doing anime conventions for years. I need to draw comics because I want to do comics. So let me draw something cute and fun. And because I started that comic, I now am doing like, working with like my dream publishers and stuff. And it's like, oh, wow. But that's my favorite thing about comics, is that there's so many ways that you can tell them and draw them. Like lately I've become kind of obsessed with like webtoons, which is like comics on your cell phone. So like the format is so different, but with webcomics, especially like the traditional page by page webcomic, like what's interesting about it is just making sure like you always have a hook on your page, because you want people to come back like the next week or the next few days, which is kind of like the same when you have like a traditional graphic novel. novel where you always kind of like, well, you want to make sure that they are turning the page to read like what's happening next and stuff. So, and then that versus doing like short story comics, it's very, I have fun with them because I feel like I get really experimental with how I choose to tell the story just because I have such a limited page count. So those are fun, especially like when it comes to doing like stories like about myself and, you know, parts of my life. It's, you know, really fun to just have like a change of pace. But yeah, I think graphic novels give you a lot more room to just explore your characters and your narrative and everything. Whereas webcomics is kind of like the same, but it's definitely like, you can really evolve your world. Like I know some people who have webcomics that run for like decades and it's just like, wow, like I can't like imagine. And some people who are like, oh, I did like an 80-page webcomic and it's over. And it's like, you could do that. So it's really fun to see how everyone does their comics.
That's great. And so Jerry, you were known across the country for Mama's Boys, the comic strip that was in newspapers all over. Do people, as you've traveled the world and the country this year touring New Kid, do people remember you from Mama's Boys? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how your readers are responding to your graphic novels now.
So what's funny is I've experimented with a lot of different formats. You know, I tried my hands at the single panels, you know, so I love reading them, don't like doing them. So Liz, I give you a socially distant pat on the back. You know, it's amazing to be on, you know, like I used to read The Far Side and just be amazed that it could be funny every single day. I started doing Mama's Boys. I like the comic strip aspect because I had 3 or 4 panels where I can kind of unfold and get to a punchline. And so that was interesting. But, you know, I did Mama's Boys for about 20 years. And I think that in about a year and a half, New Kid has surpassed everything that I have ever done with Mama's Boys, as far as like, you know, the amount of books sold, the amount of fans, but a lot of the training. I think one of the reasons why it's successful is because I was used to panel, punchline, panel, punchline. So when I did New Kid in Class Act, I was used to having that kind of humor throughout. So when you're talking about things like microaggressions and, you know, or racism and classism, it definitely made it more accessible to fans by having it, you know, my goal was to have it laugh out loud funny. So there's a lot of kids who read it. And, you know, the graphic novel format too is so much more embracing, you know, because some kids like myself, when I was a kid, would look and just see gray pages, words, and just shut down. Where when you go in and you see the pictures and you don't realize that people are putting the same story arcs and character arcs and vocabulary and things like that. But it's a way to really get a lot of reluctant readers reading also, which is an additional benefit of it.
Mm-hmm. So how have your readers let you know what they're getting from your stories? So tell us.
Well, you know what's absolutely amazing is like I have had so many like Dr. Phil moments with like teachers and moms where they're coming over and either, you know, this kid hasn't ever read a book in my class and he read New Kid and he came to me and he's like, Miss Hollman, promise you have to read this tonight so we could talk about it in the morning. And, you know, tears are coming down their eyes. So then, you know, tears are coming down my eyes, or like, you know, kids who have never seen themselves in a book like that. And, you know, the parents wake up and it's at the foot of their bed and they're in the car going to school reading it. They're at the breakfast table reading it, you know, and just thanking me for making their kids readers. And that's why I commend all of us who are doing that, because comics are lit. They are literature, you know, and that's just been in a, you know, like just anytime where I'm tired, like, I can take a break, I think of some kid somewhere waiting for the next book. And that always motivates me to get up and, get back to the drawing board.
Thanks, Greg. How about you? How are your readers responding to those aspects of like African isms and the kind of African diaspora context of the folk tales and things that you're bringing to them? What are you hearing from your readers?
I get a lot of, I guess, thanks for one. I've had many people tell me that when they've read my stories, they had no idea of particular figures or characters that were known in any of our cultures, whether it's Caribbean, African, or African American. And some have told me that they've gone and did research and found out more information about them. And I've also had a lot of parents tell me how much their kids, they loved it. I have there's one particular fan, very young, who I've seen multiple times at conventions, and he was always excited to see me, always wants the newest Nana, whatever it is. And I remember the second time that I met him and his mom was saying how terrified his brother and him were of the book, but they just could not put it down and how much they loved it. And she was like, she's had to tell him to stop bringing it to school because all he wants to do is show it off, and I've even had parents tell me how people have stolen the book from their child's lockers and all this other stuff, so they have to get another copy and stuff. And so I've been very grateful hearing a lot of the positive feedback from it, from when it comes, whether it's adults, whether it's children themselves. But for the most part, what I wanted to accomplish with people learning about these particular types of figures and stories, I feel like I've been doing my job, and my goal has been getting hit, just based off of a lot of the excitement that I get. And people even telling me that even if they're not Black, they've found various figures from their own cultures, that they were inspired from just reading the book. So that's been pretty cool.
That's great. Liz, you have a character in your series who's a little younger than Liz at large, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is she still Liz?
I get asked these questions like all the time. Like, oh, is it Liz? Like, is it you? Who is it? And it's just like, it's like, I don't know, the most like innocent and naive and like angry part of myself are all of these different characters. Like, right. I don't know. It's definitely an aspect of myself. I don't know if it's me. I
wonder if you could talk a little bit about the younger version, because she is one woke character, right? Yeah. Particularly one of my favorites was the princess who gives her crown back.
Oh yeah, for social stratification.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, especially the New Yorker, I think I favor drawing younger characters because I think that you're able to just kind of see like society through a different lens, just a very like idealist lens, like just willing to think about, all how things could be, and like without any type of, all that adult heaviness on it. So for this one, the social stratification one that's in This Week's New Yorker, where it's like the girl reading the book and she says, and then the princess gave up her crown because she didn't believe in social stratification, which is basically like the division of society into different levels of power along race, wealth, class, all of that. The character is super woke. I think that it's a nice way to communicate information to people, because if it's through a kid, I think people are less intimidated.
That's great. And Shauna, you're in a genre like your inspiration's coming from Japanese anime, etc. And then here comes this beautiful Black character. How have your fans responded to, just the representation of a Black girl in the anime genre?
Really well. Like, again, like I've had people like cosplay my character, which is dressing up as her. And again, like I even had people like, someone made this for me, and I'm so ever grateful for it. But it's been like really awesome. Like people of all ages have been so supportive and positive with Princess LoveCon, and like the most emotional ones are like just when people like come to my table at anime conventions and are just like, thank you so much for making this, and you know, like lots of tears were shed, and I just like never imagined like, you know, touching like so many people. But you know, having grown up inspired by Japanese anime and manga, and that was mostly due to like being unable to find stories that starred female characters that I could connect to. So like Japanese stuff felt like far away enough from like typical white society where I was like, yeah, I can be Sailor Moon, okay. So I really just wanted to make comics that look like what I would have wanted to read when I was like 12 years old and stuff. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. So we're going to move to take questions from the audience. I'll ask the question and any one of you can step up and give a go. Does the graphic novel enable you to write about deeper topics in a lighter form, whereby you encourage the reader to think about these difficult topics while enjoying a larger journey?
Yeah, I will definitely take that one. I love the graphic novel format because, like I said, I really do put as much into it as I have when I've written prose novels. And to have the visual impact of if Jordan Banks goes into a cafeteria where he's the only African-American boy in there, that I can literally draw him 6 inches tall, standing next to a milk carton that has fallen over, you know, to show that he feels lonely, he feels small, he feels isolated. That when you look at it, I think can build more of a sense of empathy in the reader's eye than having him say, oh, I feel lonely, or I feel this, or I feel that. So seeing that over and over throughout the whole journey, I think has really been what has made people just gravitate to it and recommend it. And then after they have read it, it's like, wow, wait a minute. They start processing some of the stuff. It's like, wow, I didn't realize that, you know, touching your hair or calling you by the wrong name or saying, I don't see race, or, you know, these little things actually are important to the kids that are going through it, you know? So I think that the graphic novel format just really plays that to the ultimate.
I just want to underscore what you said about creating a sense of empathy in the reader's eye. I think that's so important when you're talking about these visual texts and how what's being communicated visually can have sometimes a stronger impact than the words themselves.
Right.
Right. I think that's really
and especially for so-called reluctant readers, you know, it's just an amazing thing for them to be able to get that much from it where they might have just zoned out with a prose book. And they feel a sense of like really belonging, and this is my book and I am Jordan Banks, which is just amazing.
So do you think, here's another question. Do you think that your personal art style influences the storytelling with your various characters? I wish we could see, because each of you has a really different visual style. You can see it on the website for Schomburg Center Lit Fest. You can see a little bit of each of your styles. I mean, like Greg, for instance, yours is, I don't want to call it, would you call it horror? I don't like to call it horror, but it's darker than, definitely darker than Princess LoveCon.
I mean, for me, it really depends on which story, because in each volume there's multiple stories, and the one shots are also different. And unlike a lot of the amazing talent we have here, I do not draw my stories. I'm the writer, and I hire different artists to do the art for whatever story it is. And each story is a little different. I have some that are very horror-esque, but I'm also a fan of just different genres. So I think a lot of people have a hard time trying to pinpoint exactly what the Isnana stories are, because I'm messing around with horror elements or drama or comedy, and I'm going back and forth with fantasy and so on and so forth. So, but I'm a huge horror fan, so a lot of that will show up in some way, shape, or form. Um, and it's just, sometimes it all also depends on what type of story I'm writing that will help me decide which type of art that I want. For example, the most recent is not a story, Showtime. It's a lot more lively, it's fun, it's more of a coming of age type of thing. So the art does not reflect the horror story, but maybe a previous story I did, which has to do with like a character called Rawhead and Bloody Bones. Already that tells you this is going to be a horror story. So I had to find an artist who can depict that and try to hopefully creep people out during some scenes. So just like how every artist has their own style, every story for Isnana has its own particular style as well. And speaking of, there is a Princess Love Pond scene.
Hi,
Oh, yes.
crossover. There's a crossover.
There's a small crossover where Isnana meets Princess Love Pond.
This is what happens when you work in community. I love it. I love it. Liz, can you talk about your work? Because your work is unique. It's simple. It's kind of bare.
Yeah.
And how does that relate to the levels of story that you're able to tell?
Yeah, for Liz at Large, I really purposely use a very simplistic, like almost childlike kind of style. It's very one-dimensional, really flat, little to no shading or anything like that. And that really is, again, so it can meet people at a very accessible level. Like I think that sometimes when I try to use more complex styles, it's, I don't know, like a different kind of story that I'm telling. For example, for the Google Doodle for Jackie, I really leaned into her style and made it much more layered and dynamic than I would for the Liz at Larges, because, yeah, I mean, just pay homage to her style, of course, but I think that it was a more complex story, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to go to the Google Doodle, Jackie Ormes, Ormes, and check it out. Click through, because it's almost like a mini comic story behind the Google Doodle. So it's not just the doodle, there's more.
There's like 6 panels to that. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. There's another question about, all of you have been working for years. Have you seen a change in your audiences in 2020? And what's different about what your audiences want now and going into the future? What do audiences want?
So, 2020 is by far the most bizarre year ever, but it's almost been almost a blessing in disguise, because for New Kid in particular, what the COVID being restricted of going out, so many kids needed stuff to do, and parents started buying books, and teachers were home and librarians were home, and they were catching up on reading, and they were like, oh, well, let's check this book out, let's see. And then when kids needed something to do, they started book clubs. So you had that kind of thing. And then once, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and that really had protests all over the country, then parents and schools were looking for ways to gently broach subjects about things like racism and classism to their kids. So I got on a lot of recommended book lists that way. So, in a horrible, horrible time, it's just great that, my work and our work, all of us, have been used to kind of add some normalcy to kids' lives, and I think that's why it's such an important thing of what we all do.
And so how about the second part of the question? What changes would you like to see, or how would you like to expand your audiences in the coming year?
Kids that have never gotten the opportunity, because you know, like when you go to Comic-Con, like New York Comic-Con, right? There are 1,000 white artists there, and we're all there buying their work, right? You do the African American fest at the Schomburg, you know, Black Comic-Con. There's not a lot of white families coming in to buy, you know, Princess Love Pond for their kids. And I think now there's more of that. Like, you know what? We really don't know anything about this culture that we claim to know about. So I would like to see more of that, where it's not, hey, this is a Black book, you know, let's just read Princess Love Pond. Like, wow, this is kind of interesting. Like, let's just put this into our collection of books, you know, where it becomes regular reading, and you get our books into, you know, some of the school systems and some of the library systems and things along those lines, so that they're not just books that you read during Black History Month, or when you're trying to prove to your friends that you're woke by giving, you know, your kid a book, you know, that it just becomes regular reading. Like I said, just like my kids read Wimpy Kid, they weren't like, oh, this is a white book.
Yeah. Shauna, do you agree? How would you like to see your audience expand, especially with your graphic novels coming up?
Yeah, actually, I'm currently pitching an early readers graphic novel for like grades 1 to 3. So crossing fingers. I really want to focus on Black joy for 2021. So as soon as I clear my slate of work, that's definitely what I want to do, is just make more works that focus on bringing a little hope back into the world, because 2020 was really, really hard. And yeah, I'm hoping to make like more stories that introduce comics to younger and younger readers, to get them into wanting to read, period. And also to like, so they can grow up seeing like, wow, like there are books that have me, you know, they don't have to experience what we did, where it was like a struggle to find representation.
And Liz, this 2020 is an incredible year. You're dealing with the kind of psychosocial aspects of life. So what are you looking forward to next year?
I'm working on my first graphic novel, so that's really exciting to like go into the graphic novel space. I mean, 2020 was a weird, because this is my first year really working for myself. I graduated university in 2018, so like I'm very new to the career world out here. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into the longer graphic novel space, to get out of just the, you know, one panel, and definitely closing that racial empathy gap. That's huge. Because that's a huge problem across all media, all journalism, everything. So yeah.
Yeah, so she did say 2018, huh?
I have one more question before I ask you all where folks can find you on various platforms. But maybe, Greg, you can answer this one. Do you embrace the new trend of listening to the audiobook while reading the graphic novel? The project When Stars Are Scattered received great feedback for their full cast audio version.
You know, it's not something that I've thought about. I've been seeing a lot more people talking about audiobooks recently. I've yet to even hear one, because I just love hearing whatever voice is in my head when I'm reading a book. Mm-hmm. But thinking about trying to turn it into a comic format, I think someone has suggested that to me in the past, and thinking about how I could maybe play around with, you know, sound effects and soundtrack ideas and music in the background and different voices. That's definitely something that trickled in my head a little bit. So I might do a bit of research on my end to see if anyone else has done it in a similar fashion for comic books, and see where I want to take it. But it is definitely something I think would be like flipping cool, especially because I know that's a whole different avenue that's just been blowing up a lot more recent. And I think that is something that a lot of people needs to understand, that the times is always adapting. Mm-hmm. It's the same as some people originally were against digital reading and digital formats. And it's just like, you gotta go with it. You got to go with it. And same with apps, all these new apps that's coming out, and we're just like, why? But that's a perfect way to try to capitalize and get a different audience.
That's great. Jerry, you have an audiobook for New Kid. Do you want to just answer that really briefly and then tell us where we can find your work?
Yeah, it's really interesting because just this weekend, my friend's granddaughter had a copy of New Kid and was like, yeah, I'll read it by the end of the year. And we were in the car and I put on the audio version, which does have a full cast. And she flipped through with the book. It's like, hey, we're in chapter 2. Wow, we're in chapter 3. Wow, we're in chapter 4. And then once she got out the car, continued to read the book. So that really did get her in. And the full cast that HarperCollins did was just like amazing. Like it just brought it to new light so that kids can just turn the page. Again, it's an exercise, it's a muscle reading like that. So they may need training wheels, at times, but then they will go off on their own and it does definitely inspire. So I can't wait to hear the audiobook of Class Act.
Fantastic. So where can we find New Kid and Class Act?
New Kid and Class Act. Yeah, I didn't want to say, but yeah,
I'll
everywhere.
say everywhere.
Start at your independent bookstores, so like the Lit Bar in the Bronx, and there's some really, really great ones all over. And yeah, if you can support the indies, that's where I push you. But so basically all over.
Schomburg Shop.
Schomburg Shop, absolutely.
And your website and
website is just my name, jerrycraft.com.
Twitter.
And again, Class Act will be out in about 13 days, October 6th.
Fantastic. And you're also at Jerry Craft.
Yes, at Jerry Craft on everything. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Nice and simple.
Shauna, where can folks find you and Princess Love Pond?
You can find me online at shaunadraws.com, Twitter, Shauna Draws, and Instagram, Shauna Draws Cute. And you can read Princess Love Pond at princesslovepond.com.
Fantastic. Liz, where can we find Liz at Large?
You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Liz at Large, and my website is at lizatlarge.org, or it's lizatlarge.org.
That's fantastic. Greg?
You can find me on IG, Greg Day, GregDae. My website for Isnana is webwaycomics.ecwid.com. You can find any type of Isnana book and merchandise. And once again, I'm currently running a Kickstarter. You can just Google Isnana the Werespider Showtime on Google. That link should show up.
Great. And you can find the Black Comics Collective at the Black Comics Collective on all platforms. Thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. I hope all of our listeners get back to school with reading graphic novels and comics and web comics by Black creators, because the representation is strong, it's righteous, and it's cute. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry, Shauna, Greg, Liz, Deirdre, for a fantastic panel. Again, please support their work. You can find Jerry Craft's books in our Schomburg shop, but please support the work of independent authors. Our next program is called Everybody Looking by Candace Elo, and she will be in conversation with Mahogany L. Brown. That program starts at 6:30. Remember, if you're returning for the program, to refresh your screen browser so that you can go directly to that program. See you then.
Blue text on a background composed of a light semi-transparent grid of headshots for all of the festival guests. The text reads, "For the full schedule, visit www.schomburgcenterlitfest.org."